Headlines are deceiving. Things are not good. In fact, things are so not good that every 7 and 8 out of 10 appraisals do come in below what they should be. In employment opportunities, there is none. Canada isn't creating jobs really. We were creating some jobs in the public sector, like you said, during the elections period.
And our politicians will point to that GDP number, which they're inflating via immigration. When you really look at the numbers, like you said, when you really dig into it, GDP per capita is in a negative and has been for the last 2 years and will probably get worse. And so we're not going to immigrate our way out of that problem. If we can build up that energy sector, build up our total output of energy and be able to export natural resources, something that we can offer the rest of the world, we have nothing else to sell. No one is going to continually buy up our real estate forever. Welcome to Supply and Demand with Adam Nadler. This is a podcast dedicated to the real estate market in Canada, available now on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. It looks like the market is finally settling into a very nice, very shallow, let's call it a trough. And like sellers are now kind of really accepting it. So from the mortgage perspective, I guess, obviously we know sales volume is like way down, but everybody's always talking about, oh, when are rates going to get lowered and this and that. And I keep trying to tell everybody, like, don't expect that to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
Buckle up, prepare. But like, you're the real pro, you're the real expert on this. So take it away, my friend. What the hell is going on?
It's hard to read the market when it's going through a period of adjustment like it is going through today. It's hard to understand all the things that people are struggling with, but you were right? Like the sales are down. We've seen month after month weakening up until I think what was just last month. We've seen some improvement in July.
Yeah, July was a better month, but like
compared to what?
Exactly.
Compared to last year? Well,
Yeah.
anything was better than last year.
Yeah.
Just pick a number on a graph.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of what headlines were like. Oh, it's the best in a few years.
It's deceiving, right? So those headlines are deceiving. Things are not good. In fact, things are so not good that I'd say about, and I don't want to be like right now all doom and gloom and say it's 9 out of 10, but say like good 7.
But it's good for the algorithm. Go ahead.
Every 9 and 10 appraisal, no, okay, like every 7 and 8 out of 10 appraisals do come in below what they should be. And and what's rare about this, and this is also very indicative of the problem that we have in the market. It's not that people are overpaying for properties, which sometimes happens, right? You can get a little excited about something, offer an next 20, 30, 50 grand that it shouldn't really doesn't maybe deserve. But what's to really show how confusing and how messy the market is, it's important to understand why there is such an appraisal problem. Because an appraisal problem like this, if you were in this industry, or if you happen to be the unlucky winner of the draw of when to sell the property, and it happens to be 2017, you have seen appraisals come in weird. And it often happens because there is maybe an adjustment in the market, but it becomes really difficult to get the right value in appraisal when the market is wacky, in a sense that there are only so many sales. And because a lot of these may not be exactly comparable to each other, the appraisers are left with a very difficult challenge of having to basically make sense of the only comparables that are available. So what ends up happening is you'll have, let's say, a person who buys a property for $1.5 million, and this is probably fair for the value. But then there will be somebody who was originally selling at 2.3 just down the street, because they had like a brand new built home, freaking 4 stories with all kinds of upgrades, all the new bells and whistles. But they couldn't sell at 2.3, nor 2.2, and not at 2.1, not at 2 million, not at 1.9, not at 1.8, and maybe they finally sold at 1.795 or something. So that creates a really difficult challenge for the appraiser because he's looking at the comparable and saying, okay, there's like literally three, and one was listed at 2.3, sold for 1.79. And then maybe he found another comparable that, was listed for 1,200,000 and somebody bought it with a reasonable range of 1,100,000. It creates a big disparity because now the appraiser who's looking at the $1.5 million property is saying, okay, how do I rate this when the thing that was supposed to sell for 2.3 sold for 1.8, for example, and the thing that was sold for 1.2 sold 1.1. Like now we're seeing a lot of the purchase appraisals coming in not at value, but a little less because there is just no comparables to use when those appraisals are being completed. And that tells you of the problem of how few sales are actually happening, right? Because this would not be the case if there were so many sales that you can just pick like any property and just find enough comparables that the values track out. But right now in the summer of 2025, appraisals are really a big challenge. And if when the purchase and appraisal is maybe a little bit more liberal because somebody just paid the price that is on the agreement of purchase and sale, when it comes down to refinances, if you're doing a refinance, you're trying to pull money out of the property, appraisals are coming in very light because the appraiser is bound by the rules that the banks have placed on them to determine a value that the bank could pretty much expect if they had to sell within, 30, 60 days or something like that. Like nothing crazy. No one's going to sit there and wait for it to get the perfect offer. So what ends up happening is now you have this very weird situation where yes, rates are a little better than they were again last year, the year before. Uh, you know, yeah, maybe there is some programs that are available, and I've mentioned this in the previous podcast with you, where I said there are more programs that are flexible and liberal in the ways they look at certain things. Their banks are trying to make deals happen, but when there are only so many deals happening, the whole market is continuously adjusting, and it doesn't know where to stop because in order for things to stop, like, I was recently looking at a chart of United States real estate affordability, and if you bother to check, and if you want to just go and look it up, um, it's at an all-time worst moment in terms of its affordability. And what's interesting about that, in parallel to what I was saying earlier with us, is that when we have such crazy swings in affordability where it becomes so much easier to rent than it is to buy because buying is so expensive because of interest rates, prices, etc., typically over time this self-adjusts, right? So perhaps what we're going through now is we've reached a limit of affordability in the last several years, partially because of how high the real estate has gotten, partially because of how high the interest rates have gotten. And based on that, we're now going through a period of adjustment where affordability is trying to find itself, where investors are again more interested in buying some property. So we have some investment flow, and home buyers are not so afraid to go and place an offer because they don't feel like they're going to be buying a falling knife. And that's probably the best way I can summarize my view of it from the perspective of appraisals and from the perspective of values, because that I have been seeing it a lot.
Okay, there's a lot to kind of go over here, and really want to touch on appraisals because it's something that I've been, of course, hyper skeptical of for many years, being in the industry and always understanding that everything always hinges on an appraisal,
Yeah.
and an appraisal is just an opinion at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, at a micro level, uh, if you're a seller in this market, I guess from my perspective, being on the transaction side of things, you want to get an offer on your place. You want to be able to sell if that's your intention. However, even when you do get an offer now, you kind of have to be questioning, well, like, who's this buyer? Right? Because what if they give me something and I go and accept it and we take in a deposit and I make my life decisions and my plans based on that?
Yeah.
And then the appraisal doesn't come through.
Happens.
Right. Will I get their deposit? Most likely. Right. If
Well, if you have the conditional period still, then
No, I'm saying once your 5-day conditional period is done, you're still making your life decisions based on the fact that this is going to close.
right.
And if the appraisal value changes between now and then,
What you mean, yeah.
like what are you doing, right? Your entire plan hinges on that appraisal coming through, and if that appraisal doesn't come in, well, then you're kind of screwed. And so even if you go to buy something else, now you're going to lose your deposit on that place. And so it's not like just because you have the deposit, you're safe. You're not.
Yeah.
And so I think what sellers are now slowly starting to realize, or at least if their listing agent is good enough, they're explaining this to them, like the sequence of events of like what happens
Yeah.
down the road if this goes south, is they're saying, well, look, maybe accepting a lesser price in a way kind of safeguards you a bit,
Mm.
right? From that appraisal value not coming through.
Yeah.
And so, what would you rather have? Would you rather take a lesser price with kind of an insurance, you know, I guess premium that you're purchasing essentially. You're purchasing an insurance policy on that
Mm.
appraisal, or are you going to chance it? And so that's kind of becoming a question, and at a macro level. So that's at the kind of the micro level, and at a macro level, uh, appraisals at the institutional level are becoming just a way to get us through this really dark time in the Toronto real estate market, and I guess I'm referring mostly to RBC. So what's your take on that? Because most people don't know what's happening with RBC in these blanket appraisals, and it's been a hot topic, at least on this podcast. What's your take on that?
Okay, so I'll say this first of all. I'm not gonna say that it's just RBC. I think the banking industry in general is in a difficult conundrum. Um, so you have what you're referring to is that some banks, we're not gonna call it anything specific. We're just gonna say some banks, because we're politically correct. Because some banks have really good lawyers too, and they'll bash you for saying things online.
Did I just shit the bed on this one? Oops.
It's okay, controversial, kinda good, kinda bad. But speaking of just generally, like, the problem that the banks are facing today is that we have enormous amount of inventory that is being released, right? Or already has been released and is just in the process of being registered with the city, and I'm talking about condo corporations. Like, enormous amount of inventory. And the thing that you're talking about is the fact that a lot of the banks that have issued pre-approvals on that inventory, let's say a couple of years ago, are choosing to go off of the whatever purchase price is on the agreement of purchase sale, and they're willing to bypass the appraisal. That's really what's happening. And the question becomes, well, how can they do that? Like, I'm a broker. I broker mortgages. I can't do that. If I have a customer who wants to buy anything, I have to go to the bank and ask for their permission to get the money and to get the approval. And then, there's conditions to the approval, and every approval that is not insured, and we'll talk about that separately, requires an appraisal. So if that's the case, then how come is it that some banks are able to skip the appraisal? Well, actually, it is quite simple. So in some of these cases, when banks are dealing with sales offices for these developers, they will be dealing with the developer as well in a different capacity. So the arrangement is that if I'm, let's say, a bank, let's call me XYZ Bank, and I come to actually developer comes to me and says, "Hey, I need this gigantic, I don't know, $50 million loan so I can build this development. And if you give me the money for it, I'll pay the interest rate. We can negotiate this transaction. Obviously, I have money of my own, but you need a little bit more. I will give you the right, the exclusive right, to advertise to all the purchasers at this development, so that you can get additional business, and we can be branded as XYZ Bank special program. So we have special exclusive programs available to the buyers of this complex, and everybody wins. And the bank goes, well, it's pretty good. I get interest rate from this gigantic multi-million dollar loan, and I get to put my brand on this development. Everybody knows that I'm the major bank for this, and everybody comes to me. And plus, I get additional business. God knows what kind of money that is long term, right? Because again, it's a lot of units a lot of the time. And so in this arrangement, the bank has a vested interest in a way, right? Because they have this gigantic multi-million-dollar loan that they need to get paid back because the construction will eventually come, finish. The condo corporation will get registered, and then the individual units will be sold, and then all that capital will flow back to the bank to pay off the construction loan. But for that to happen, the units have to sell first, meaning that somebody has to buy them and be able to close. Well, to make sure that those transactions are closing and there is no issue with appraisals, because there would be. I mean, I just got an appraisal yesterday for a unit, Midtown Toronto. It's already below 1,000 square foot for even the nicer areas, right? Again, we were just talking about like crazy, 2022, 23 numbers when it was like what 1,200, 1,300 per square foot. It was like 1,600. I've seen the highest, I think, in like Yorkville area and stuff like that. So this stuff is depreciating significantly, right? And so if you start appraising all these units and then all of a sudden you realize that all that deposit is gone, it evaporated in this situation that we're in over the last couple of years with values of depreciating. Now they can't close. Now you have all these buyers who can't close, and that means there is no capital to flow back to the bank for the construction loan, right? So the bank has a provision when and I can't remember, somebody explained this better than I'm doing it right now, or I will be doing it right now. But somebody did this really well on Twitter the other day. They were explaining how there is a provision where if the bank is already committing on the construction loan, and the pre-approvals that they have granted to the individual buyers, um, are relying are, are relying on the original appraisal from for the development, that they can still hold. They can still roll with the approval as is without having to verify any values. So the idea is that basically, as long as there is, um, a big institution behind development that has enough of the volume from that sales office, the development will exit, and the bank will get their money back, even if some people didn't use them. And it could just the wheels of the world just keep on turning. And what happens next, we don't know, because when these things close, and then some of these people will choose to finally sell and extract their equity out, like there'll be no equity, at least not in this market, right? So the hope is that most of these buyers won't sell for some time, and by the time that they do sell, the values will appreciate enough that hopefully there will be no losses, and that's it.
Well, that's super scary
Yes. It's scary.
because you have major financial institutions, the big five, that are giving out at loan to value ratios that are above 100%.
Yes.
Knowingly giving out bad debt.
Yeah.
And so what we end up in is, a situation where, number one, these are uncharted waters completely.
Completely.
And if any of these people who bought these places can't hold them for whatever reason, rental market's now starting to go down.
Yeah.
Um, Anything happens where we get the pendulum swinging further in this direction, um, we can see a bit of a catastrophe here. Now, the one thing that I will say about real estate debt, which I think is better than other forms of debt, is that it's uncallable debt. I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine who's an investor. He hates real estate. And, we always go back and forth on this and what's the good part, what's the bad part. And the one thing that he always says is, the one thing that I really like about real estate debt is that it's uncallable debt, right? As long as the payments get made, the debt can never get called.
Mhm.
And so I guess when we're really looking at it, it's, can the payments sustain? Can whoever it is that has purchased sustain the payments?
Yeah.
And are the tenants who are now going to be in a lot of those condos, because a lot of them were bought by investors,
Yeah.
going to be able to sustain not only their rent, but willingly decide to sustain their rent, given the fact that if they choose not to for whatever reason, I mean, there's essentially almost no recourse against them. So I guess, where do you see the more obvious pitfalls in that, and how do you think that we're we're going to be seeing a changing market due to that, like in terms of just like regulatory
Oh,
frameworks.
pitfalls are many. I mean, you have, like you said, you have a bunch of money that's got lent out and continuing is continued to be lent out at loan to values that exceed the value of the property, right? So I mean, like that's just a ticking time bomb. If you had a significant worsening in the economy and unemployment rate started to really crawl up and you started seeing people lose a lot more jobs and a lot more people would not be in a position to maintain their properties, like, we have a inventory avalanche right now in the GTA with condos. Well, look what it's done to the condo market. All right, it's adjusted it significantly. Like in just a matter of months, we've seen stuff that sold for 6 now sold for 5. Like the beginning of the year was a little, exciting for people. By like end of May, all excitement just completely gone out the window. And so um we're now seeing like a period of adjustment that's already hurting this segment of the market. If you had more and more keys were dropped on a table because you could maintain payments, well, it could start like a real domino effect.
Right. So essentially, it's all hanging on employment, which is already high and climbing.
Unemployment, yeah.
Yeah, unemployment. And unemployment, I think in July was one of the worst months ever, where we were net down 40,000 jobs.
Can't remember the like percentage nationally. I remember there was 7.1 in May and then 6.9 in June, and then July it went up again because we got excited about like what some people got excited about. I thought it was just like smoke and mirrors. Uh,
Well, it was because they included the employment numbers from Elections Canada, which is all back in April. So that was all just, yeah, exactly, smoke and mirrors, which didn't come out until June. So in June, everyone was like, oh, well, unemployment's not so bad, this and that. But really, those numbers were completely fudged and we shouldn't be including those.
there is no growth in employment. If you look at the growth just in employment, sorry, in employment opportunities, there is none. Like, I mean, Canada isn't creating jobs really. Like, we were creating some jobs in the public sector, like you said, during the elections period. We're creating lots of jobs before Trudeau resigned. And then now we're going through like a period of adjustments where we're supposed to see government jobs cut back. I actually got corrected the other day on Instagram because I reposted something about um what was it again? Oh, it was something to do. I think it was actually this exact comment that you just said about the 40,000 jobs we lost in July. And I posted something. I just thought it was funny. I wrote, "Yeah, but we can always just make more government jobs, right?"
Hmm.
And then some people thought it was funny. Some people actually got a little upset, and they're like, "Yeah, but we're cutting the public sector." And I went and I started looking into it a little bit more in detail, and this person was actually 100% correct. We are cutting back on the public sector. We have been for the past few months. I have not noticed that as much because what I see is anecdotal experiences. And when I started digging through the data, I realized we actually are improving that. But like by how much? Like not enough to improve our budget. I mean, the budget is a wreck. And like I was also looking at the government spend on military that Canada has really increased since, well, the situation with Trump got out of hand a little bit. So we went from spending like less than 1% of our GDP for years on military to almost spending 4%.
Hmm.
Like, it sounds like 1%, 2%. What does it matter? 4%. It's like, no, 4% of your entire country's GDP is going towards military. Yeah, it's still not enough compared to some other countries like the States, where it's a massive amount that goes beyond what like our economy can even output. But like that's a massive jump that will create some military industries, contracts, opportunities, some growth at the expense of the tax dollars, which naturally means that when we go into these cycles of overspending, which we are going into, like somewhat of an overspending cycle, because like what we're about to spend with stimulus in the next like 2 3 years, I believe, I can't remember the exact number they announced, but it was something in the hundreds of billions or something like that. I can't remember right now. Um, but that number was greater than the number that we stimulated with during Trudeau era, right? So we're going into a period of government spending. And the last time we had government spending, it got so out of hand that we ended up having to like really raise interest rates and really tighten the bolts. So today's topic, when you first started the podcast, right? It's like, where are we going? How do you make sense of what's in front of us? And this is a conversation actually really well tied to interest rates and pricing and bond yields and stuff like that. And when you look at the way, we behaved post COVID, with the interest rates being super low, trying to stimulate the economy, trying to get it to breathe a little bit so that, we can maybe start to tighten up the bolts a little bit and increase interest rates a little bit at a time. And we had to go through a serious period of interest rate adjustments because inflation got out of hand. Well, again, inflation got out of hand because we had to stimulate. We had to print money, we had to issue bonds, and then the cost, and because, these are things that cause inflation, we started to really tighten up the bolts, 2022, right? And then now here we are 3 years later, and we're still not out of it. But we are already going into the next cycle of spending and trying to figure out how to stabilize the economy, but at the same time doing all the same things. So if we're doing all the same things that we did in 2020, 21, 22, maybe not exactly, but like we're still going to be doing a lot of the same. My guess is that there is a reason why, when you look at, let's say, the interest rate grids from the different banks, there is a reason why they're pricing 3 years the best. And I think the reason they're pricing 3-year terms the best is because they're saying, okay, look, we have a pretty good idea of what to expect under this government. We have a pretty good idea that government is going to be helping and business is going to be okay. Like, government's going to make sure the business is going to be okay for the next 3 years because we have to make sure it's okay. Um, So we're gonna rate this distance as the lowest possible risk, right? Or we want you to take it because this is where we can see how far we can see. And if you take any longer, let's say a 4 or 5 year term, well, those rates are higher because we actually don't know what's going to happen in those 4 or 5 years. But because there's so much ambiguity, what happens after the next election, or after this government, this is also why we're going to risk rate it a little higher. There's a lot more to do with like cost of capital and how it's generated. So we're not going to get into that right now. But I think there is some telltale signs uh, of what's to come when you just look at the pricing, because it
Oh,
kind of gives it away.
that's a fantastic point, and I really that's why I love having you on because you can really kind of like look at the data and say, look how the banks are pricing their rates on different terms, and that kind of gives you an idea. Banks are not stupid, right?
Mhm.
They're doing their underwriting based on massive amounts of research, and of course, at the end of the day, it's all a hypothesis of
Yeah.
what's to come. It's future, guessing. But there were a few things that you mentioned there that I'd really love to unpack just a bit because I've been railing about the bond market and bond yields for a long time now, this entire year really on the podcast, because I don't think people are paying much attention to it and they should be. And you just brought it up on your own there, which I think is fantastic because it really kinda like, every time you come on, I'm like reaffirmed more and more. I'm like, "Man, Konstantin really knows his stuff."
Thank you.
So, yeah, the the way in which our government is controlling or unable to control their spending habits is throwing us from stimulating to tightening
Yep.
through these cycles. But the way in which you described it makes it very apparent that the pendulum is actually swinging farther and faster in each direction. So
It's like a
so the cycles themselves are shrinking in terms of their timing, right? So they're happening faster,
yeah.
and when we swing, we're swinging further, meaning that the spending can only increase, right? We're in a debt-based leveraged economy. We can't decrease it, right? Unless you're willing to actively have voters vote for austerity,
Yeah.
right? Which is completely politically unpalatable and almost never happens,
It's
right?
hard to win with that.
Right. And so you're either going that route or you're going the route which we're going, which is we're going to try to balance ourselves on this tightrope, by swinging further and further to each side, which obviously doesn't make sense. And so what
They don't want to do it like that, but they don't have any choice really.
well, because they're already so far onto one side, they have to
Yeah,
rebalance.
it's just extremes, right? You hope that this you never have to do that, but when the extremes are like they are to like if we didn't have Trump south of the border who just suddenly just introduced tariffs, like things would have looked very different this year, right?
For sure.
So the pendulum's been swinging, has been oscillating at much quicker speeds than it has been before. This for sure. Like cycles are shortening, so that is correct. And so this is something that we should be getting more used to. I think like I don't know for sure, but the times where variable people got really used to taking variable year over year because it was like, oh, there's just period of low interest rates. How much higher can it go?
Well, that
I think that's kind of maybe over. Like I think is we're now entering a territory where a variable truly, really and truly is a risky product. Like you can get really quite a bit of savings out of it, but it's the kind of a thing that you have to really watch. Like you take it, but then you convert it the second that you feel that okay, the pendulum is really swinging the other way. I better convert to a fix now.
right. So when central banks were in a ZIRP policy, which is zero interest rate policy, um, that the variable rate became a stable product
Hmm.
that was reliable. However, now that we're constantly and consistently, still to this day, battling inflation, and it's still coming up all the time,
Yeah.
and government spending is completely out of control. And as Lynn Alden puts it, nothing stops this train. They just the way the mechanics of the system work, they actually can't stop spending, and they have to increase spending in order to keep the system stable. And it's not stable, but to just keep it going, to just
Just keep going.
kick the
Yeah.
can down the road, um, is it's kind of built into the system that way. So I guess what happens when they can't kick the can or just is it something that is just never happened before, so we don't actually know?
We don't know. We don't know. Nobody really knows. I guess at some point, you know, Rome did collapse. Took a few hundred years. Like we may be going through a period of like significant decline in the West because of our over financialization of the system.
Or just like a fiat
Mm.
collapse?
Yeah, that's kind of already happening, I think. Like we're already seeing that currencies have little stability. Like there is a lot more attention now going towards alternative currencies and things that hold value outside of the government apparatus.
Well, it's also a factor I think that people are starting to realize now with Trump being in power, which I think the kind of eye-opening, enlightening moments for even people on the left and the right about how that really impacts us with with the whole fight that's happening between Trump and Powell right now. It's bringing Fed independence into question,
Mm,
right? And most people, I think, just kind of took it for granted that the Fed had independence, that the Bank of Canada has independence, right? We always knew it was politicized, and there was always influence, of course, but at the level that it is now, with the pressure that's being placed politically on central banks, I think both sides of the aisle are starting to wake up, both here and in Canada, to, well, there was a reason why we had central bank independence.
of course.
And now that we know that that's not really the case, well, what are the alternatives? Like, if we can't rely on central bank independence and that separation between church and state when it comes to money, well, then what are we supposed to do, right? And so I think that the way that it's manifesting is a bit different than I think people had really kind of envisioned it would be, but it does seem to be happening right now, and I think people are waking up to that. It's not all to be laid at the, feet of Trump. I think he's just kind of the catalyst. It's kind of like showing us what's already been happening, but it is very interesting to see. And
He's showing what's been happening. He's also showing us what not to do sometimes. We'll see what the result of his term will be. Like, it's definitely going to be an unusual one. I think Canada's got some serious challenges economically that will come as a result of this term, and we might be like it looks like we'll be a lot poorer by the end of this term. So
yeah, so the 3-year then is the term. That's what That's what banks are pricing out right now as being the cheaper because they understand that stimulus is coming.
They want you to take it because they also want you to take it because in their eyes, like, the thing is that it could go one of two ways. So, most likely, and we can go back to this tape in 3 years. We'll actually see if I'm right. What's likely going to happen is that we're gonna go through a period of stimulus and government spending that's unheard of for the next little bit, because we need to make sure that whatever is happening south of the border is not destroying us. So we need to make sure we stimulate and we keep the economy going, keep the industries going, right? Okay, good. Then we're gonna go into a period where they will have to somewhat adjust. And I don't think they'll do it right away because 3 years is not actually that much time. Like, it might just be enough time to maintain what we have and get to the finish line. And then they're going to leave this problem to the next government to deal with because they'll figure out ways of dampening the inflation and playing with the rates and whatever, but within like reasonable grounds. Because obviously, the last thing that any government wants to do before they're about to go into the election season is to look really bad.
Okay, so let's say then, and that's always the case, right? Is let us print now,
Yeah.
stimulate the economy in,
Pay
anticipation for the
fat,
next.
like, make it look real good so we look like we're growing almost.
Right, and then make it look good for the next election.
Yeah.
And if we lose, we leave it to somebody else to kick that
Get
can down the road, and then that person does the same thing. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. That
So
that
and then so the idea is that, like, let's say they go through the period of elections, they lose, to whoever, and then that next government comes and goes, "Oh shit, this is really bad. We gotta do this, we gotta pull this back, we gotta pull this back, we gotta, talk to the Bank of Canada, they probably better increase interest rates because inflation's got out of hand. As soon as we pull this out, we do this."
right.
And then all of a sudden now they're the bad guys.
But if the high inflation environment that we're heading into due to, too much government spending,
Too much money.
right, too much money printing, becomes a really big issue, and we're now just kind of trying to stay afloat without completely devaluing the currency and hurting our global trade, with currency exchange to a point where we're forced into austerity.
Yeah.
Do you think that it would be something like maybe what Japan is doing? Because eventually we're gonna have trouble selling. We're already having trouble selling our bonds,
Correct.
right? Like, bond auctions are failing. However much they're politicized in the, papers about how they're doing great, they're really not. And so if bond auctions are failing, we can't actually increase yields enough artificially to entice investors to purchase. We can't get the Bank of Canada to agree to purchase and put more on their balance sheet because they're trying to.
Well, Bank of Canada is like the biggest buyer of bonds.
Right, and they're trying to decrease their balance sheet, not increase it. So if all that is happening, do you think we end up in a place like Japan where we just start yield curve control, which we know doesn't work?
I hope not.
I hope not too. I hope not too, because that gets real dicey, and then you end up in prolonged, persistent inflation, and real estate markets completely tank over the long term.
That is scary. It's not completely impossible.
Well, it happened. It happened in Japan. Most people have a very short memory about how that all happened, but it happened the 80s and the 90s, right?
Japan is a very unique case. You're correct. They also have like other problems that are like cultural demographic problems.
They have massive demographic
Uh,
problems, but they also they're the largest holder, I believe, other than the states, of US treasuries,
mm,
right? And so they tried to stabilize their economy by doing that. And I think we're up there. We're not, we're not in the top 5, but we're in the top 10,
yeah,
right, of holders of US treasuries, right? I mean, where else are we going to put our money?
I put it somewhere.
Well, now we don't have a place to put it, right? What are we going to do? We're going to elbows up, yet at the same time we're consistently buying US treasuries. That also kind of like made me a little nutty because I was looking around. It's like this whole elbows up idea of like, oh, well, now, you know what, guys, you should really be buying Canadian maple syrup instead of buying American maple syrup. When at the same time, we have all of our major institutions, all of our hedge funds, all of our teachers' unions and their funds and, their retirement savings all going into the Mag 7, all going into, indexes of US companies or going to buy US treasuries, which are all on a treasury ladder. yet at the same time we're saying elbows up, it didn't really make any sense, and it
Yeah.
still doesn't make any sense. You know, like where does that kind of end? Where do we finally just go, look, we've had enough. The Canadian population can rail all we want in the media on CBC about how much we hate Trump. Okay, fine. At the end of the day, we're not going to win in a trade war with the US, and we're the only ones that don't have a deal.
Yeah, somebody was asking me, somebody asked me the other day, he's like, "Can you just give me, like, if you had to give me a summary of what's gonna happen, uh, to Canada and the States relationship in, like, a small paragraph, how would you describe it?" And I was saying that we will probably be going through a period where we will, like I said, get poorer over the next few years, and then we'll look at the States because 'cause they're a massive economy compared to us, and we what we haven't been affected by yet is, like, something like a recession in the States, right? Because when the recessions in the States happen, like, which again, doesn't happen, like, every year, but whenever they did happen, if you look at the economic output for Canada, like, it looks rough because we are not immediately affected on a graph, but you can see just, like, a little bit over, and you can see the declines in Canada as well, and because the investments get drained out of Canada as well, right? So, like, my worry is, if I had to guess, like, where this relationship is going, is if we are really that focused on, like, severing ties with the States and being our own country, then we have to become a lot more open to the idea of really exploiting our natural resources and really doubling down on the things that make us as a country the most money so that we can offset all these negatives because we're losing too much money.
That's a fantastic point to bring out.
So wait a minute, so wait a minute. So I think, and this is so what I answered in the end, I said, I think and I hope, and I'm not saying this in a way where, like, I'm gonna be feeding off of this. I'm not gonna be enjoying this. I hope that Canada's economy really tanks in the next 3 years, like, really bad, so that we wake up as a nation and we hold our politicians accountable for the promises they make, like, really, because we're gonna be really poor. All of us are gonna be really poor in 3 years, right? That's the scenario anyways. And so we get really poor, like, McDonald's double cheeseburger used to be 139, it's like 369 or something like that. Like,
with elastic pricing.
and like, get it to, like, 555. Like, get it real bad, like, to the point where you're gonna be looking back and saying, "This used to cost me 6 times less." And then, like, after that, there's no way that a government that performs so poorly, and again, I'm not saying this, I'm not feeding off of this, I'm not, like, anti-liberal. There are some benefits and some pros and cons to both political agendas. Some leaders are not the best, right? We had that experience recently. But what I'm saying is, this is what it takes. You can't go from an okay position into a really good position. That's just not how typically things work. You gotta hit rock bottom to really expose all the stupidity of the system as it is, so you can really cut the slack and then make your way back up. And probably literally what will happen is, like, the way that, we sort of are swinging in one direction right now. We had a little bit of polarity at this last election season, and that polarity, actually, in my opinion, is really healthy for a country because it produces really good voices and really good thoughts, and produces competition within the political circles. So now they're really fighting for attention. They're really fighting for, like, a good agenda versus just trying to push their flavor of agenda, if you know what I mean. So, like, I hope that the next time we get to this election and we are doing so much worse that we just can't ignore it, that we finally, like, vote in favor of at least change. Maybe not for the better, but you never know until you try. But maybe a change that's radical and change that allows and opens up, industries and things that Canada has been really shy about for the past 10 to 20 years. And maybe this is what takes us out of it. Because if we continue on this path, like, we are just probably 10, 20 years away from being, like, a shadow of our own selves as Canadians, right? Economically. So
That was spoken like a true Slav. Seriously, I no, look, my girlfriend's Ukrainian,
yeah,
you know, her family escaped the Soviet Union, and it's only people who really, I think, come from that culture can really truly understand how bad things can get and still have the generational trauma to really appreciate it.
true. There's something to it.
Right, and I think that that's where we're gonna see the great divide in, the Canadian zeitgeist of parentalism right now, is, that's where the divide will happen, where, we have immigrants who have that trauma and that memory of what that kind of ideology ultimately leads to, where that rock bottom goes,
That's right.
and those who have never experienced it, who don't understand it, and who want to play with that fire. And I think that's where we're gonna see the divide. And it's gonna be really interesting to see because at the end of the day, the working class, the immigrant population is going to side with the more laissez-faire free economy type of political agenda. I agree with you. I think that that's where we will ultimately be headed, and you touched on our energy sector, you touched on our natural resources. As much as Canadians are extremely shy and have been extremely shy about that, it's gonna be the only way to do
It's
this.
the only way that we can pull out. There's nothing. We're not really. We don't have like TSMC in Canada to be able to have something that nobody else has. That everybody has to be nice to us for.
Right, so we don't produce anything. So, as much as the government will try to
Like we have Bombardier, but it's been literally in debt since inception.
no, that's our aviation sector is, like, completely a joke. And at the end of the day, that I think that that's where the rubber's gonna meet the road because we don't produce anything. So as much as Canadians will always, and our politicians will point to that GDP number, which they're inflating via immigration, when you really look at the numbers, like you said, when you really dig into it, GDP per capita is in a negative and has been for the last 2 years and will probably get worse. And so we're not gonna immigrate our way out of that problem, right? And so if we can build up that energy sector, build up our total output of energy and be able to export natural resources as as a stable and predictable and reliable export, something that we can offer the rest of the world, we have nothing else to sell. No one is going to continually buy up our real estate forever. It's the same thing that happened in Japan, right? You have to have something that you're offering the free market of the global economy.
That's right.
So I'm with you on that, and I think that there is going to be a major push for that coming down the road.
There is one recommendation is gonna make out there. So, and this is just to all Canadians. As Canadians, uh, I don't think majority of us unfortunately have the opportunity to travel or the privilege to travel enough, because everybody's so bogged down with bills and paying rent because it's so astronomically high compared to the rest of the world. But if you did find the time and the resources to go and travel to places that are not in Canada, like I'm not talking about developing countries, I'm talking about developed countries, and you see how those countries are. I'm talking specifically about Europe, but the American dream is the dream of being able to have your family, to have enough space for it, to have some necessities and some nice things. But it's really this idea of being able to have um, to have your little haven, to be able to build your own little haven and do it on your own terms. That's like the American dream. You want something, you want this family, you want this house, you want this truck, whatever. You just go out, you get it, and you just put it together. And if you work hard enough, it happens. That's the idea, anyways. That's how it used to be. So, you know, the dream is still there. Like everybody still dreams of those things. And I think naturally when people go to university, even today in the 2020s, that's kind of what is being sold and advertised. And that's what everybody subscribes to when they agree to be part of this fine economy. Um, the issue is that when you look outside of Canada and the States and you go into other parts of the world, um, a lot of developed countries don't have the same dream. They don't dream for the same things. They dream for other things. They dream for health. They dream of just a small little space and a little bit of water next to it, but no people, preferably. And they dream for just a nice, like just a comfortable flat, just so it's not expensive, so they can have more money in their pocket and take vacations. And it's like interesting how, here we're constantly facing this uh never-ending problem of, how do I get enough money so I can at least have a good quality of life or a good standard of living? And so the reason that I say, go out there and travel, because if all Canadians realize that this is what the system is doing to us, we would not be very happy to know it. But nobody really understands, because nobody really goes out and, travels and sees the world the way that it is, because everybody's just too busy trying to pay bills. Um, so, like, with in the world of social media, like in the 2020s, you would expect that those things would be more accessible and people would be able to judge the world on how it is outside of their own little cocoon, and be able to then demand things from your establishment and from the place that you live in to have things differently, because you would expect that a place like Canada would have the resources and things and the people and the systems and, the legal system to defend and protect and provide for the people that live here, right? Um, so so that creates an interesting challenge. It's like, well, why is it happening like that? Because we haven't spent any time in the last 30, 40 years building any real meaningful, affordable housing for the people that live here. So to your point, the economy is also not growing, and it can't grow anymore because the housing is so choked that we can't let any more immigrants in because we have nowhere to store them. And that was the bloodline for Canada in terms of, like, workers, talent, and investment for many, many tens of years. And so, to kind of, add some good notes to today's podcast to show some positivity. Well, the one thing that is happening today is we have significantly more construction permits issued and some significantly more construction happening in the realm of purpose-built housing and multi-unit properties. And that is now not in the thousands of permits, not in the thousands of units. Now it's in the hundreds of thousands of units that are being prepared and to be released in the next 2 to 4 to 5 years. And so my hope is that this is what happens. If we did get to a point where, not that the incomes finally matched the housing cost, but the housing costs finally met the income where it should be. Like, maybe if we finally seen enough rental supply to offset the demand and provide some leverage for the people that are looking, like, not just put out just enough to house everybody, but have some room so we can pull in more talent and more investment and more people into this country and grow it, like truly grow it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Canada was 100 million people in 10 years from now? It won't be, right? But what if it actually had the capacity to do that? Well, that's double the productivity. That's double the economy. That's never gonna happen because like, incredible levels of development and growth is just, like, impossible for me to even imagine for Canada to put out. But if we did, we would be in much better economic position because there are more taxes to collect. Your TELUS bill will probably go down by half because we have twice as many people. But these are the things that, like, if we really, really pay attention to as Canadians, and we demand and we really, really, watch our politicians' agenda, and we hold them accountable after they promise those things, and we all really, really get involved. Well, hopefully, with some of this development happening in the background, with a lot more beds becoming available in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years for a lot more people to have affordable housing, if affordable housing truly becomes affordable, and we can now start really thinking about that dream that we once had of having the things that we wanted when we were younger. Well, now there is hope, and now there is some inspiration to work a little harder and go back out there and make your own legend, so to speak, right? And if that did happen, well, maybe then in 10 years from now, we'll be looking a lot better.
I couldn't think of a better way to kind of take us home here on this. And overall, I think you're right when it comes to having the breadth of perspective to understand the greater picture,
Yeah.
that the human experience isn't just about, um, the pissing contest of Instagram and making sure that, your house is consistently and forever always getting bigger. I think the Canadian obsession and with real estate, and I mean to some extent the American obsession with real estate as well, but really I think we're more intense about it in Canada than even they are in the States. Maybe in some cities they're pretty intense too, but here it's really gotten out of control. And looking around and seeing that other people in so many different countries all over Europe, everywhere in the world kind of look at us and go, "Why are you guys so obsessed with buying real estate?" It's strange
Well,
to them.
but the reason and the answer to this is because Canadians have seen real estate rent, sort of this rental rates go astronomical over the last 20 years. And they go, well, if I don't buy now, I got to deal with tomorrow's prices for rent. Whereas in Europe, for example, rent is actually really controlled. Like if you're in Germany, you can get flats for 5, 6, 7, 800 euros. It'll be 2 bedrooms per month, right? And that rent will not change. It will stay as long as you live there. It will stay like that. Small, like 1%, 2% increases, but that's nothing for you, right? So you could pretty much bank. So if you live, let's say, in Germany, and you rent out a flat for 800 bucks, 800 euros a month, and it's a, I don't know, 1,000 something square feet of a flat. It's plenty of space for you to even just have a family in a flat as opposed to a house. And it's only 800 euros per month, and it's rent controlled because it's somewhat partially government rent. Why would you ever care to own anything? I mean, you could.
Well, we do have rent control here, though.
Yeah, it's but again, the rent control, what, at like 2,000 something per month already?
Right. So, okay. So here,
Like, you can also evict people too, right? There's also rent evictions. In Germany, they cannot evict you at all. They can get rid of you.
but this is I guess, the double-edged sword with rent control, right?
Yeah.
Is that if you're in, can your rent go up? Not more than 2 or 2.5% is usually what we see here. But it raises necessarily as a byproduct the entry point. The barrier to entry then goes up, right? Because you don't have free market push and pull on that
Well,
level.
a lot of the housing in Europe, they do have it. They specifically have like government rent organizations, like property management. They'll be partially government rent or government owned. And the purpose of that organization isn't to make a profit. It's actually just to provide housing, right, for the people. And it's like very decent, very nice.
Yeah, there's so many things at play that kind of all contribute to that and the cost of living. Germany is a very interesting case in particular because they're, as kind of reap the most benefit from the EU
Well,
as
they so in Germany, interesting thing is that all these rentals that I'm talking about, these are post-war built rentals. These are rentals built post Second World War. They were just built real quick and like put together with brick and whatever. They're actually like quite fine built. Like they still stand and they're fine, and they're well maintained. They because it's a government agency. It's I'm sure there's some level of subsidy and money comes from the government to maintain these corporations. But I guess my argument was that I don't in Germany, the dream of homeownership isn't like it is here. It's not like a thing there. Europe has already, for the most part, come to terms with the idea that you probably will never own any real estate if you were born post like 2000, post 2000, really, pretty much, right? Unless you have inheritance and family and parents. But it doesn't burden the Europeans because the cost of housing is still affordable outside of ownership. It's just that ownership is a luxury more than it is a necessity. Whereas in Canada, it's a necessity. It's not even a luxury. And here, the necessity is what keeps you away from the big problems, right? Because if you're too busy just paying rent, you never have time to think about your life or your relationships or the meaning of what it is for. And, are you actually doing okay? Are you doing okay mentally, physically? Are you taking care of yourself? Like, Canadians are so bogged down by the routine of having to pay bills, they get very little enjoyment out of this life when you compare it to the rest of the world. And that is the byproduct of like poor, in my opinion anyways, that is the byproduct of poor government policy towards this issue for too long, right? So to the point where now, like, it's discouraging people from staying here, and people just keep picking up and leaving, and it's a lot of young people too. Um,
Yeah, brain drain is a big problem.
and it's like we already don't have a lot of birth in Canada. We have been bringing in immigrants for dozens of years because there is not enough birth in Canada. And now all these young people are leaving Canada because it's, like, impossible for them to make their own legend, and they're just opting in for, like, the States or some places in Europe or Latin America and whatnot, or maybe Asia. Asia has been really, really huge for a lot of, the talent drain from Toronto. I keep hearing about it literally daily. Um, so, like, let's stay optimistic. I'm not saying that we're gonna see Canada decline into oblivion. I'm just saying that for every period of decline, there is going to be a period of improvement. Decline is not forever. Hopefully, the decline period is not going to last for very long.
And it's not linear either.
It's never linear, and even in the worst of times, there will be opportunities. Um, some of the best times to start a business is when you lose your job, right? Like, Not not business or job advice, by the way, but just a saying, like, if you wanted to start a business, quit your job because it's really hard to start a business when you're working a job already. If you want recovery, after a period of stagnation and economy decline, well, let it tank, like, let it really hit so that we all feel it, and then let us put a joint effort towards making it better.
I think that's a fantastic message to end on.
Awesome.
Because I do think it's, there's no such thing as, um I would say I would almost call it like I don't like empty optimism, where it's like kind of just like hollow, I guess, in a way, where you're not acknowledging the other side of things. And
Mhm.
so I like that message. I like the message of, let's see where things go. But, for Canadians and for anybody listening to this, take a wider view, take a bigger breadth of perspective, understand that, like, this is not the only way of thinking about life, and there are plenty of other people in lots of places of the world who are plenty happy. Um, so I guess we'll bring it home on that note. And to everybody that is listening to this, summer's ending, so don't make things harder on your life than they need to be. Take your vitamin D. It's about to get real dark real quick. And Constantine, where can people find you?
You can follow me on Instagram. That is my main channel. So you can just follow me at the Pocket Broker.
Thanks for coming, man.
A pleasure.